Well, thank you all so much for joining us, by the way. My name is Ariana. I am ECA's Program and Grant Coordinator. I am so thankful that you all are here today, and I'm also very thankful to all of our lovely panelists and our two lovely moderators that are here joining us today. Our conversation, Let's Talk Environmental Justice. We want to especially thank the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power Light for partnering with us to put this on. They're two lovely organizations, and in our follow-up email, we will be linking them. So I highly suggest you check them out because they're amazing and they're doing amazing work. We really wanted to bring you all here today to talk about this issue because it's something incredibly important that we really need to be focusing all of our climate conversations on. Because the reality is that climate change isn't affecting us all equally, and environmental burdens aren't affecting us all equally. And we really need to start addressing that, and we all actively need to learn about that and learn how we can be supporting frontline communities and marginalized communities in the climate fight and in the climate movement. So I want to get started by introducing some of our speakers today, some of ECA members, members of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and People's Justice Council. Also, we have Ernico with the Dogwood Alliance. So I'm going to give some longer introductions. Please feel free to wave, panelists, if you're comfortable with that, so everybody can know who I'm addressing here. So we have some lovely panelists. First, I would like to introduce Ernico Brown. She is the Director of Organizing and Partnership Engagement at the Dogwood Alliance. She holds an MA in Organizational Leadership from Columbia College, and she has countless certificates, some of which include Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion from the University of South Florida, Faith-Based Nonprofit Leadership, and she's also the founder and executive director of the nonprofit Hours, which is the organized, uplifting resource and strategies. So thank you so much for joining us, Ernico. I would also like to introduce Kyle Kreider. Kyle is the Program and Policy Director for Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and the People's Justice Council as well, and is an adjunct university instructor at the University of Montevallo. Kyle holds a bachelor's in environmental studies and master's of public administration degree with a double emphasis in urban planning and policy analysis. He is a leadership in energy and environmental design accredited professional, neighborhood development, so LEAD. So thank you so much for joining us, Kyle. I would also like to introduce Dr. Peggy Robnitz. She has a master's degree in biology and a doctorate in environmental science and engineering from UCLA. She's also worked in the environmental consulting industry for over 30 years. A lot of her experience involves evaluating the human health impact of both industrial and mobile source emissions in disadvantaged communities. Through her work in this field, she personally experienced the evolution of human assessment techniques over time, from accidental release modeling in chemical plants to early Superfund site fate and transport modeling to quantification of cancer risk in industrial areas and along transportation routes, and most recently, the use of highly sophisticated multi-pollutant, multi-pathway models in assessment of disadvantaged communities. Her perspective is going to be on where environmental practitioners started, what they learned along the way, and what they have yet to learn. Also, Peggy is here as a founding member of the Elders Climate Action Southern California chapter. So thank you so much, Peggy, for joining us. Those are our panelists, but I'd also like to introduce our moderators for today's discussion. After this, you won't hear much of me. You will be hearing from the lovely Kalia Martin. Kalia, thank you so much for joining us. Kalia holds Kalia is the Climate Fund Program Manager at FCYO, where her job is to support the development and execution of the Youth Organizing for Climate Action and Racial Equity. Kalia started as a youth organizer with the Youth Empowered Solutions, which is YES, where she supported young people as they worked to increase access to clean water in schools, helped to innovate the Charlotte Public Health Department's tobacco prevention outreach strategy, and became and sought out leaders for making the connection between racial justice and climate justice in order to create effective policy. She is the former Environmental Justice Working Group co-chair for the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, and a current leadership member in the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective. Clea is looking forward to carrying out her dreams of helping the worlds of climate activism and racial justice collide. And they hold a Bachelor of Social Work degree from UNC Greensboro, as well as a Master of Social Work degree. A free and audacious soul, they hinder a human ability to dream radically and live more harmoniously with ourselves. They grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, and then moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and they enjoy spending time with loved ones. And they also devote time to being a filmmaker, creative producer, speaker, facilitator, and founder and striving embodier of Disrupt Transform LLC. So I don't know how you have time for all of those things, but thank you so much for taking time to come be with us, because that is amazing. And lastly, I would like to introduce our other moderator for today's discussion before I pass it off to them, Reverend Michael Malcolm. My apologies. Reverend Malcolm is the founder and executive director of the People's Justice Council and of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, and is a licensed and ordained United Church of Christ minister. He works so heavily with the environmental justice movement. He is the environmental justice representative for the Southeast Conference of the United Church of Christ. And Rev, you have done so much work, I cannot highlight it all in one bio. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. And thank you to all of our panelists and moderators for taking time out of your busy schedules to come be with us today. It is truly an honor. So Rev and Kalia, I'm going to pass it off to you to kickstart our conversation.
Well, thank you. And it is great to be with you all. First and foremost, I need you all to smile and look a little bit more alive, because it is the summertime. I know it's hot, but I know you've got a lot more joy in you than you're putting on these screens right now. So I need y'all to kind of liven up a little bit. I'm not, by far not a melancholy person. I'm extremely animated. And so we're gonna have us a real good time and have some good conversation and be educated all at the same time. It's just gonna be a good Southern good time. I don't know how many folks from the South, but if you're not, you're in for a treat right now. Let me tell you. Listen, I'm gonna step out of the way and let my sister Kalia get on, because this is by far one of the brightest people I know on this planet. So let me be quiet and let her start talking.
Thank you, Rev. You'll have to forgive us. We haven't gotten to moderate a panel together in a while, so he's gonna show out. He's gonna cut up a little bit, but we're gonna have a good time. I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. It's nice to meet you all. I see that the majority of folks here are from the North, and so this is an interesting mashup, I think. So I'm looking forward to also learning from you as we spend this time together. And so as we know, the topic of today's webinar is around the conversation around environmental justice. And so we first want to just invite you all, because we know that everyone's coming into this space with varying degrees of experience and exposure to this topic and to this conversation. And so just inviting you all to sit with curiosity, be willing to lean into a conversation that might be a little bit different than what you're used to in these spaces. Because if we're going to be talking about environmental justice, we're going to be talking about race. There's no way to not talk about it. And so just naming that up front and inviting folks who may be a little bit uncomfortable with this conversation to know that we're in this together. This is a conversation rooted in growth and love and liberation, really. And so if at any point there is a question or something that you don't understand, please ask in the chat. There is no wrong question. There is no dumb question. We're here to learn and be in this space together. So I just wanted to invite you all into that curiosity, into leaning into those things, and even if they get uncomfortable. And so we're just going to kick it off to each of the panelists. And so essentially the question that I have for each of you, and Ernico, since we go way back, I'm gonna come to you first. I want to hear from you in terms of not only what is environmental justice, but how did you get into the work of environmental justice? What was going on in your community that brought you to this point that you end up on this webinar with me? How did we get here?
It's been a long time coming. That's to start it off. No, seriously, for me, raised in the South, born and raised in McCormick, South Carolina. Your typical thing, family, rural area. Let's see, raised by my grandmother, a lady who had a 10th grade education. We didn't really have a whole lot of money, and to us, we didn't seem poor by white people's standard. We were poor, and so ended up meeting somebody, and they were talking about environmental justice, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, what does this do? And they were talking about an edible organic landscape and a demonstration site, and so I go and I see this, and I'm like, oh, girl, you got a garden with raised beds, like, what is this? You know what I mean? I've had a garden, and I'll be honest with everybody, I'm 35, and I've had a garden my entire life. So it's like, what is this thing that we're talking about? And so I started going to these convenings, started going to these conversations, and it was always how hearing people, and particularly, just to be honest, hearing white people always say, how can I be an ally to Black people in their communities? And I was like, first thing we need to acknowledge is this $10 word that we throw around, sustainability is survival, which Black people have been doing for over 400 years. And this new word that we coined, mutual aid, is how Black people have fed communities for years, because I have a cousin who has cows, and on our side, we had corn. And if, we needed the manure to put in the garden to make the food organic, we went over there and got it. And once it grew, we gave them corn. So that is mutual aid that people are now coining now. And so it's like, for me, seeing how white people have been rewriting history and feeling like they can take our story and then make us seem less than, became a problem for me. And so I had to get into environmental justice, number one, because I needed to tell my story, because my story is very much different from the story that's being told. And so I've been approached by different people to be on panels, to have conversations, and basically stand before people and carrying the strength of my ancestors, and what I know to be true, and what I know to be true being very different from the things that are being said, and how history is being rewritten. So just making sure that we have a seat at the table and we are part of the conversation, and being able to speak our truth to power is how I get here with you, Kalia.
Thank you so much. And I just want to lift up some of the things that you said, where you talked about this idea around, the witnessing of folks rewriting history, right? So we're talking about sustainability and a return to like a healthy connection with our environment, but we're not talking about how it got to be unhealthy, right? We're not interested in naming the genocide and the colonization and the enslavement that took place, along with the extraction of our natural goods and resources, not only in the US, but across the world. That has gotten us to a point where we now know that there is a climate crisis because of our consumption levels. So I appreciate you just lifting up the fact that the practices that we are now talking about in mainstream circles as it comes to adjusting our practices in the climate crisis are things that communities of color have always done. One hand because of survival, but because of our connection to nature, and trying to maintain that in the face of very real obstacles, i.e. white supremacy. So appreciate you. And I just wanted to, you were being nice. So I'll name it for you. So thank you so much for lifting that up. So next I want to go to Peggy. And Peggy, the same question is for you. Like, how did you get into the space of environmental justice? What was going on in your life and in your community that brought you to this point?
Well, I was born in a small farming community in Minnesota. And my parents, of course, now the phone rings. Get it to stop here. No. All right. My parents were following the aerospace boom in Southern California in the 60s. So we moved mid 60s. They weren't making a lot of money at the time. They wanted to buy a house. They found through their coworkers a community called Carson. And Carson in Los Angeles County is home to fossil fuel refineries, chemical plants, and is also one of the communities they consider diesel death. It's where all the heavy duty trucks go up and down various freeways that surround the city, carrying goods from the Port of LA and Long Beach. So we bought a house there, and it was quite different from Minnesota. It was very multiracial, multicultural, and it turned out to be an incredible gift in terms of my education about other cultures and races. But there was air pollution. For the most part, we were okay, you know, in certain seasons, but when the Santa Ana winds came in and the wind directions changed and the air from the refineries and the chemical plants went near our neighborhoods, we all got bronchitis. But we all got bronchitis, so we didn't really think much about it because it's just what happened in the fall. And it wasn't later until I got into environmental work, I started being educated about air pollution, that I realized that probably a lot of this had to do with health effects associated with air pollution. And then ironically, I was brought back to my old neighborhood. I spent most of my 30-year career in those communities, evaluating the impact of expansions of LAX, the refineries, the doing risk assessments for chemical plants, and looking at diesel toxicity associated with the movement of heavy duty trucks. And I was a health risk expert at public meetings, and it should have been scary, but once I, explained that I was from there, they opened up. I was able to listen, to talk. I think over the course of my career, I was able to craft some mitigation strategies that probably helped the communities that I lived in. But there's a long, long way to go.
Thank you so much. And you're getting gratitude in the chat as well, in terms of just like lifting up some of the experience that come along with being in Hollywood, right? The prime jewel, but there is a lot of environmental issues going on in that community. And I really like when you said that everybody got bronchitis, right? Like, yeah. Because everybody got it, it was kind of normalized, right? And right. It's like, especially when you have white people in your community who are also getting sick, it kind of legitimizes what's going on. Because,
at least the white people, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you lifting that up. And I also think it's just interesting thinking about the fact that whether or not something has a racial implication, all of us are negatively impacted. And so that's what I really heard resonating with your speaking. So I just appreciate, one, the amount of time you spent working on this issue and lifting up and helping us make that connection. So Kyle, I have the same question for you.
Thank you, Kalia. Well, probably no surprise that I've been white privileged and a tree hugger all my life, but late in life, I've learned what my education, my degrees, my first mentors didn't fully teach me, and that is that we're all in this together. That environmental justice is the flip side of any environmental work that we might care about, that we might think is important, because there's people involved. And we, PJC, People's Justice Council, and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light are interfaith organizations. And it's notable that every major faith has some variation of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so, late in life, I've come to this full realization that, yes, what we do unto others, and this is what Peggy was just saying, we're doing unto ourselves. I'll channel one of Rev's sermons, you know, the wind blows and the water flows. And likewise, whatever we do unto the least of these, those with the least political, economic, whatever kind of power, ultimately we do to ourselves. There may be a delay. We may think we're getting away with it, but it's gonna, you know, as we sow, so shall we reap.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And y'all, please forgive me because I realized I wanted to start before we ask the panelists. I want to provide a definition of environmental justice. So if you allow, just so we're all on the same page for the sake of this conversation, the definition that I'm using actually is the EPA definition, so the government acknowledged definition. I do think there are some groups who would take it even further, but even as a baseline, this definition is pretty good. So the EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Fair treatment means that no population bears a disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, municipal, and commercial operations, or from the execution of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and policies. And so that's essentially a definition saying that everyone in this community should have fair chance at having access to clean water, air, and so forth. But we know historically that there are certain communities, and by certain, I mean communities of color, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities that have been disproportionately targeted for very, very harmful industries. And so when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about the fact that there are communities who are being intentionally targeted by both government officials and private interests, namely corporations, in order to put dirty and polluting facilities in those communities. And why do they do it? Because they think they can get away with it, right? Because they think that as long as it's in this Black community, no one's really gonna pay attention, even though we know that these chemicals are really toxic and they shouldn't exist in the first place. So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about environmental justice. We're talking about the historic impact that communities of color have faced by various industries and being held complicit by our government structures. And so with that, I'll pass it to Rev.
Thank you, Kalia. And thank you, panelists, again for opening us up. I've got a question for you. We just gave a definition of environmental justice. You spoke about how you got into the movement. What environmental justice issues are happening in the communities that you work with, or even in the environment that you live in? And I guess I'll start off with Dr. Peggy, because she was the one that rested the most the last round. I don't know.
Okay, and this is one I'm dying to answer anyway. So I think the whole environmental justice, and I'm coming from the perspective of air pollution, okay? It evolved over time as our knowledge of health risk improved. I started looking at health risk in the 1980s. I worked for an engineering construction firm, and we were mostly worried about accidental release. If it's a chemical plant and a valve breaks, is it going to kill people in the community? And there was one particularly tragic episode in the late 1980s in the city of Southgate, another disadvantaged community in the Southern California area, where Clorox facility had a chlorine gas line that leaked, and the weather conditions were just dramatically perfect. It took that plume and it targeted a bunch of kindergartners, mostly Hispanic 5-year-olds, who were standing at a curb waiting for the mommies and daddies to pick them up. Several of them ended up in the hospital. I actually re-simulated that incident for LA Unified School District because I had a contract with them, and showed how it happened. But that's what we were really worried about, stuff like Bhopal and the real catastrophic stuff. But there was a lot more under the surface. Then in the 1990s, the Environmental Protection Agency released something called RAGS. It's the Risk Assessment Guidelines for Superfund sites. And that's the first time we start looking at what are the pollutants, at what doses are people experiencing these things, and then what kind of exposures and what kind of sensitive receptors, like older people, people with underlying conditions, school children. And I did one of the first risk assessments for EPA on a EPA lead smelter site in Idaho. And I was constantly talking to him about trying to figure out what this looks like. Then we started using this process beyond just old, hazardous waste sites. Now we're starting to apply it to industrial sources, but really focusing on cancer risk. And at the time when we did that, we knew that, LA air was terrible. We had already calculated that about 1 in 10,000 people in LA die from lung cancer associated with our air pollution. But we thought that air pollution was distributed evenly over the population. All of us had that cancer risk. Then the South Coast Air Quality Management District put a bunch of monitoring stations around LA just to see if they could see differences in communities. And to everyone's surprise, we realized that the health risk actually concentrated in certain areas, which coincided with disadvantaged communities. So then we passed a regulation called AB 2588, which basically said any facilities that release this stuff have to do risk assessments. More importantly, they have to engage with the community and start doing mitigation strategies. One of the things we learned during that whole process is, of all the drivers of health risk in LA, that diesel particulate was the biggest bad actor. And so then we started incorporating it into transportation planning and did a lot of work in that. And then over the last 20 years, we realized it's not just cancer, it's not just acute exposure, that even lower concentrations of air pollution can make you ill. And if you're in a community without good access to food or the ability to exercise or the knowledge of how to keep yourself healthy, you are going to be affected even more than, a healthy person. So lately, the California Air Resources Board and the Air Quality Management District have kind of started working with communities on community-based risk mitigation in areas where they know there are multiple sources contributing to overall risk, and starting to come up with their own mitigation strategies that address community-specific concerns that the public has brought, the people that are experiencing it brought to the table. So it's encouraging, but we still have a long way to go.
Thanks, Doc. I guess, Carl, I'll come your way with it as well, even though I can help to write your story because we work together very closely. But I'd rather for you to tell your own story, as Ms. Ernico talked about earlier. What are you seeing out here in these streets, and how's it impacting you?
Well, thank you, Ref. Yeah, I won't speak for myself. I'll speak for the people that we talk to, that we have met and gotten to know, the voices we're seeking to amplify. And I can't think of a better example than when the infamous Kingston coal ash spill was cleaned up. When these dams and reservoirs that contain the toxic coal ash that's a byproduct of our coal burning power plants, when one of those dams failed and this toxic sludge descended on a middle class community in Kingston, Tennessee, it killed people directly, and its toxicity continues to affect the workers who cleaned it up. I'm going to put clean up in quotes, because when this spill was cleaned up, when this toxic sludge, a hazardous waste, was then transported to be cleaned up, it was transported, you're probably not surprised, to Alabama. We are open for your toxic waste business. We have the world's largest hazardous waste landfill. Well, when this toxic sludge was, quote, cleaned up, unquote, if y'all remember, I'm a big fan of the Far Side, and y'all may remember a Far Side cartoon in which this geeky old guy scientist is filling a chalkboard with equations, and then his fellow scientist is pointing out a problem, because he says you might want to be a little more explicit here in the middle, because in the middle of all these equations, the scientist has written, here a miracle occurs. Well, a miracle occurred when this toxic ash was transported. A miracle occurred between Kingston, Tennessee, when this ash was toxic, a hazardous waste, and Uniontown, Alabama, where it was dumped as non-hazardous waste in a municipal landfill. And this is just one of many things affecting Uniontown in Alabama's Black Belt. So these are the voices that we seek to amplify.
I ain't got all day, but I also wanted you to talk about the environmental injustice that happens with our utility bills, our energy bills, and how in Alabama we have the highest bills with the lowest rates. Help us to understand that and put that together, because I think that not only affects our single Black sisters who are raising kids out here in these streets, but it also affects our elders as well. And I know some of your ears just perked up when I said that. Cal, can you just speak about that just for a minute? And then Nico, we're gonna go right to you. Again, I can write your story too, because most of the time we out here in these streets together, but I want you to tell your own story nonetheless. So Kyle, can you just talk about the energy burdens that we deal with as well? And then Ernico, can you pick up from there?
Thank you, Rev. Yes, as we're talking about climate, obviously coal ash is a byproduct of burning coal, which affects the climate. But more directly, there's an interesting energy mix for our power providers in Alabama, and probably in your state too. We've got Tennessee Valley Authority that provides power to a lot of folks, mainly in North Alabama. Alabama Power, a company under the Southern Company umbrella, provides power for the lower 2/3 of the state. But even that's too simplistic a picture, because there's these things called co-ops, electric cooperatives, and municipal providers and so forth. So one of our big problems here in Alabama, I'm just going to address Alabama Power, part of the Southern Company Hydra, and in many ways the most regressive head of the monster that is the Southern Company Hydra. We have a public service commission in Alabama that's supposed to represent the public interests, hence its name, against this supposedly regulated monopoly. Well, here in Alabama, our public service commission is a puppet service commission. They serve at the beck and call of Alabama Power, and they do ridiculous things like tax-free sunlight, and then complain about fuel prices and raise our rates to cover the fossil fuels that they have to purchase while ignoring free sunlight. Years ago, they grudgingly approved 500 megawatts of solar power, and they, if you've seen the recent report from Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, SACE, they barely implemented half of this 500 megawatts. They are stuck in fossil foolishness, taxing free sunlight, making it hard for folks to go solar. And all of this means, and they're also worst utility in the country for energy efficiency. The things that would actually save folks money. And so, yes, if you are poor, if you are a single mother, if you're struggling to pay bills, then Alabama Power is not your friend. Energy burden, which is roughly, if 6% of your money goes to pay your utility bills, you're considered energy burden. If 10% goes to pay your utility bills, like your Alabama Power electric bill, because they do stupid things like we were just talking about. That's considered energy poverty, and we got a lot of it in Alabama, in the Black Belt, throughout the Southeast from this kind of foolishness. And so the same thing that's killing the planet, our fossil foolishness is hurting working moms and many others, folks who are having to decide whether to pay their power bill, keep their power on in a heat wave, or maybe buy medicine or put food on the table. And I'll stop at that because I know Ernico and the others can say a lot more too.
Thank you, Mr. Kyle. Yeah, so some of the things that I'm dealing with most directly, I'm an impacted community member when it comes to industrial logging and forest deforestation here in South Carolina. I literally live about 2 minutes away from a wood pellet plant that is in a historically Black community. And those 2 minutes, I hear the train like all night. I'm dealing with the trucks up and down the road each and every day. So this is like in my community. So personally being impacted in that way. Also, where I'm from, living in McCormick, South Carolina, we're still dealing with the issue of having broadband and internet like readily available. So there's a lot of lack in access to things. For me, living on the outskirts of McCormick, South Carolina, the nearest grocery store is about 15 minutes away. And in McCormick, there's only one grocery store. And so we deal with living in food deserts, not having the resources that we need. And even in our community, if you say you had to go to the emergency room or to the doctor, anything like that, the nearest hospital is about 25 minutes away. So just having those things readily available and around you, no, we don't have. And living in Greenwood, where I live, being directly exposed by the wood pellet plant in Viva in Greenwood, and them, I think they caught on fire last year. And not just for myself, but all of the people who are directly, like people live like right across the street. When we did a hearing last year to talk about their expansion, I think it had been like 6 months in the process. And by the time we got to the last hearing, one of the people who lived, I think it was like directly across the street, by the time we got to the next hearing, he had died. So living in communities like that, not only that, and talking about the wood pellet industry, I was introduced as the Director of Organizing and Partnership Engagement for Dogwood Alliance, which is where I work heavily with Reverend Michael Malcolm. The largest fine to date with the wood pellet industry is $2.5 million. And to give context on that, that fine came after 8 years of pollution in the community, and $2.5 million is about what Drax does in a day. So basically it was a slap on the wrist. But I said that to say this, I work in communities all across the Southeast dealing with this issue. And in this particular community, Gloucester, Mississippi, there is a historically Black mobile home park where this facility is looming directly over this community. And the only thing that separates this community from this plant is a retainer pond and a chain link fence. So each and every time the wind blows, this is the wood chips are blowing down into this community. They hear all of the noise each and every day. They're exposed heavily to what's going on. They have people in their community, children in their community, who have to have allergy shots every week. And there's one in particular, Miss Casey's grandson. If he doesn't have his allergy shot every week, then his throat closes up. So these are the exposure, the things that I live with each and every day, the things that I work with. And another person is Miss Carmela. Miss Carmela was already having some issues, but she had even more issues with the onset of this plant. And she didn't know what she was breathing, and just going to those places, like the air is heavy, you barely can breathe, you can't be there long. And on top of that, them having a mayor who doesn't believe that things are happening like this in their community. He believes that there is clean breathing air in their community, although they've been fined by the state for this. So these are the things that I deal with on a daily basis and the things that I'm working for. And these are the things that I'm looking to put my life on the line for in the name of environmental justice for people across the gamut.
Thank you so much for your sacrifices. Thank you for being in those communities. I was looking for the picture of Blackman Hole. Ariana had sent me a message asking me to speak on it, and I said, no, I think Ernico will take care of it, because that's who I normally travel with when I go to Blackman Hole. In fact, that's the only one that I travel with when I go to Blackman Hole. So she's very, very familiar with the environmental harms that our community suffer from. If you don't mind, Kalia, I'm gonna ask one more question about our panel, and then I'll give it back over to you. But you know, we're hearing all of these things that are happening in community, whether it be the air pollution that you're feeling the effects of, or experiencing the effects of, Dr. Peggy, in California, or Cal, whether it be the environmental harms that you've heard about, or even smelled when we've been in Uniontown, as well as the energy burdens that we suffer from in the state of Alabama and throughout the Southeast region. In fact, we're right now doing a research project with Sierra Club on energy burdens, and we're finding out that not only are energy burdens a problem, but they are very racialized problem. So the byproducts of these energy burdens are what we're experiencing when it comes down to Gloucester, Mississippi, and the things that Ernico are dealing with. The question is, we're experiencing all these things. We know that these things are happening because they're tangible. We can see them, we can smell them, we can taste them. We know that they're happening. Why isn't anybody talking about it? That's my question. Why aren't we having these conversations, and why hadn't we been able to put together that this same harm that's happening to these people is the same harm that's happening to our planet? And I guess I'll start off with Ernico on that one, because she looked fired up in the face about that. So I'm gonna let her go ahead and throw the thunder on it.
Well, for me, thank you, Reverend Malcolm. For me, I'm very familiar with the energy burdens as they relate here in South Carolina. There's a program here called LIHEAP. And so this program, I used to be a career coach, and we were all community programs used to be housed in one area, and we serviced the 7-county area. And the 7-county area was basically all of the rural areas with one so-called metropolitan area, which is Greenwood. And with that, people were coming in. I've literally seen people come in who are 70 to 80 years old with $600 a month light bills. And those $600, some $1,000 a month. I've seen people who still have natural gas in their houses, $1,200 a month bills from these places. And we have energy co-ops here as well. And so what people don't know is within these co-ops, people tell you to vote for them. People get on these, and these are historically white-led organizations where they found a way to fill their pockets. And so with that, community grant programs, nonprofits, they are going to get this money from the state, where they get maybe $300,000 to disseminate across the gamut per county. And in these $200,000, $300,000, people who have these bills, they only can get help twice a year. So every 6 months, they can get help. So if you're looking at what they're putting out and what they're bringing in, and these are people who are on fixed incomes. I've seen fixed incomes be as low as $525 a month. As much as a lady that I knew, $760 a month. So for me, if you're not connected to the issue, you don't want anything to do with it. You know what I mean? And like you said, this is a Black issue. I rarely see white people, I rarely saw white people come into the office and get help for these issues. I rarely saw where the food bank was right next door, white people coming to get the food. These are issues where they have been historically Black issues. And as basically the richer got richer, the poor got poorer. And so it's like, you already can't afford food. You can't afford your health care. You can't afford to go to the doctors. You can't afford, to put clothes on your kids' back. You can't afford all of these things. And so there are compound impacts, bringing about injustices within communities. And so for me, people who don't know about this, is not an issue because they're not connected to that issue. And so for a lot of people who are possibly here on this call, maybe you guys live in your privilege and this is your first time hearing about it. This is something that I've heard, about, something that I've experienced for pretty much all of my life, like working and helping people. But in low income communities, this is an ongoing issue, and it's not a cycle that people can get out of because they can't afford to get out of.
Ernico, I'd like to back you up on that. Just
Absolutely.
Coincidentally, I worked as a volunteer in the Burbank Temporary Aid Center for about 8 years. And my job was to help low-income people, mostly of color, sign up for Lifeline programs to lower their electricity bills, and more importantly, getting them new energy efficient clean refrigerators, because they tended to buy old refrigerators, and refrigerators are the single most energy consuming appliance in your house. But in order to qualify for these programs, I had to evaluate their financial status. And it was just, like you say, unbelievable how little these people are living on, and how close to homeless they were. And, I joined the aid center hoping to help people. But what instead happened to me was, there, but the grace of God go I, because this could be anybody. You get into a situation where all you rely on, maybe for medical conditions or other reasons, is a small income. Anything can spill you into homelessness. It's a huge, huge issue. And I think it's everywhere.
Cal, the floor is still open if you wanted to add in.
Yeah, just a quick thing, Rev. I'm so tempted, but it would get us off topic to talk about this particular. We talk about root cause analysis, and one root cause would have to be this American capitalism, so-called capitalism, in which we have privatized profits but socialized costs. The costs are borne on the backs of BIPOC communities by and large, while, as Ernico said, the rich get richer. But I'd like to turn it around just a little bit and talk about solutions, because we can all get depressed talking about the problems and how bad things really are out there. So what is one solution to this? Well, one thing we think is a solution to it, we're sure as heck trying it, pushing it as hard as we can, is you heard me talk about energy efficiency and how Alabama Power is rated F, worst in the country for it. If we want to really help folks pay their power bill, reduce their energy burden, energy poverty, pay their power bills in the most efficient and economical way, it looks like this. The first thing you do isn't give them high insulation and expensive windows, or even more insulation in their house, as important as that might be. The most important thing to do first is plug the holes. Our home, we don't call him an energy efficiency expert. He prefers the term home energy makeover expert. He says, just like in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. Three most important things in real estate. Three most important things in energy efficiency, helping folks pay their power bills is, well, the technical term is envelope or air seal, but it's plug the holes, plug the holes, plug the holes. And that doesn't take a lot of money. That's low cost, caulk, weather stripping, canned foam. And so we are trying to make home energy makeovers go viral. We, PJC, are trying to make home energy makeovers go viral by using these low cost materials and a train the trainer approach. And so for very little money, you can plug the holes and save folks a whole lot of money. And then we can talk about, but first thing you got to do is eat your energy efficiency veggies. Then we can talk about all these cool renewable energy, solar and wind desserts.
But I do want to raise that when you in plugging your homes, because I do want to get back to the air pollution part of this as well. Like I said, it's not just the energy efficient, the energy burden, it's also the burden of the byproduct of the energy production when we look at from cradle to grave. And so the air pollution that's affected by when you seal these homes up, you also help to keep the outside air contaminants out of the house as well. So this is a very viable solution that we can all participate in because if we are able-bodied, for those who are able-bodied and able to get out and help their neighbors to plug up their homes, this is just something that we can do as a solution. But we do want to offer that because of the stories that we've just heard about, not just the energy burden, but also the pollution that we experience in our communities as well. Kalia's back on you.
Thank you. I've been taking notes just because like listening to you all speak, I just have so many thoughts and connections that I'm making. And I want to go back briefly, Peggy, to your story about like the wind patterns and how that changed where pollution was concentrated. And so I remember a few years ago, I learned that the same thing that you described is actually happening to present day in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I currently live. And so we have a Duke Energy power plant, which is the plant is right outside of Charlotte. The first thing with this plant is they also had a spill that got into the groundwater. And so everyone within, I want to say like a 5 or 10 mile radius could not drink their water. It never made like big news until after the fact. Even though those folks were living off of bottled water, by the time the news broke, they had crossed over their 1,000th day on bottled water and no one knew, including me. And I can touch Belmont if I walk outside. But what I learned at an event was that because of where the industry is situated, the way that the wind blows, a lot of that pollution sticks in the area of West Charlotte. And for context, West Charlotte is the historically Black, historically redlined community in the city of Charlotte, North Carolina. And so for those who aren't familiar with redlining, it's when the government allowed, the people who are developing our homes across the cities to decide which areas were worth investment and which ones were not. And a community that was redlined was explicitly said that because there is a trace of Negroes here, meaning that if you are Black and you live in an area, this area is not suitable for development. And so those maps from the 1930s are now impacting the lived outcomes of people who currently live in this neighborhood who are still historically and predominantly Black. And so that coupled with the fact that redlining, when we're talking about development and infrastructure, that also meant the communities that were redlined did not get access to sidewalks. They did not get access to parks. They did not get access to greenways and trees. And so you see a lot of concrete. We know that during the summertime, the areas in West Charlotte can be up to 10 degrees hotter than areas where there are the nature, the greenways, and all of those things, which are the historically white communities. And so as you were talking about Los Angeles, I couldn't help but think about being here in Charlotte, living on the West Side and knowing that it's hotter here and knowing that the air is worse just because of policy that was written almost a century ago, rooted in solely about race. So again, like I said, we're talking about race because you cannot remove those from the conversation. I saw a question in the
Can I
chat.
ask, can I make a comment to that? Because there's
Sure.
a story I haven't told you that I wasn't sure whether I'd tell you, but you just hit the nail on the head.
Well, let's go for it.
Okay, what I didn't tell you is when my parents were buying in the city of Carson, the housing tract they wanted to stay in had no for sale signs up. And I mean, I was 10, but this is the story I remember. It was because they didn't want African Americans in the housing tract. And so everything was done under the table. And, you know, we had all the other races, but not African Americans. They had reserved a housing tract that frankly had nicer homes and better landscaping purely for African Americans. Oh, by the way, yeah, I lived a quarter mile from Compton border. So, you know, they probably didn't want them sneaking over, you know, to live there. And so I, as a child, I couldn't get my arms around this. I mean, why does that even matter? But as a health risk assessor, my community that I lived in was about a half mile from refineries and chemical plants. And when I do this risk assessment and look at the maximally impacted receptors, it's in that Black housing tract. So if that isn't apartheid, I don't know what is not. And I recently did another one, and I tell you, I was just driving around the neighborhood pissed off, just like, this is not fair.
Thank you. I'm glad I pushed that button. Thank you so much for sharing that. You'll see in the chat, I dropped a link to an NPR article. It's a few years old now, but it's about racially restrictive covenants. So Peggy, what you're describing, sometimes it's explicit in the deeds, sometimes it's just based on the practices of that community. But there is a long and well-documented history about racially restrictive covenants, meaning you are not allowed to sell your home to someone of Negro or foreign blood. And it is literally written into documents that you can find across the country, again, because of redlining. And so as we're making this connection, I want to go to the chat because I saw a question, and I think we kind of touched on it when we talked about solutions. Let me see. It's from Leslie. I won't read the whole comment, but at the end, I see the question is, are there ways to reach out to those communities? And we're talking about areas, Black, Brown, Latino, and like low-income communities without carrying the white privilege burden and engaging with them in a truly supportive way. And then the other question around just like, what can we do? And I'll start first just because this has been something that's been weighing on me recently, is I think it's the responsibility of folks to show up. And by show up, I don't mean just to climate actions. I don't mean just to conversations around energy and democracy. Like Ernico was talking about, the people in our communities aren't just dealing with the impacts of an impending crisis that's changing weather patterns. We're also dealing with food deserts. We're also dealing with unequitable access to educational resources. We're also dealing with the impacts of a skyrocketing housing market, pushing people out of their homes. And so I think it's on all of us, but particularly the people on this call, to show up to the meetings that have nothing to do with your lived experience. So going to those meetings where working class people are talking about the needs of their communities and listening and understanding. And one of the reasons is just for your understanding, but the other reason that I think is very valuable is once you start building community with these people, the climate analysis that you all have is so important to make sure is being factored into the conversations around justice for other issues. Because what happens when we're talking about affordable housing, but we're not talking about the climate crisis, we might get a bunch of affordable housing units built in areas that we know are at risk for flooding or at risk for being hit by a tornado. Like, we have to understand that a lot of people know very well they agree that the climate crisis is real, even though they'll never let you know because it's going to affect their bottom dollar. And so we need people who are vigilant with their mind on climate and thinking about how that's going to impact us in the future to make sure that as residents are winning all of the things they're fighting for in their communities, it's not going to be a sour win, because as soon as they get that new affordable housing complex developed, it's going to get destroyed because of a tornado or because of a hurricane. So I want to invite you all to do that. Are there any other questions that are in the chat that I might have missed? Or, and if you don't want to put in the chat, we now invite you to come off mute if there's a question or something that's resonating with you at this point in the webinar. So we want to hear from you all.
Or also feel free to raise your hand on if you go to reactions on the bottom of the screen, if you don't feel comfortable just coming off mute, there is the reactions button too. You can feel free to do that as well.
Ariana, we've got quite a few hands up. And being that you're the control person, I'm gonna let you control the crowd.
Well, it is all up to you all. If we want to just start, I saw Jerry's hand up on reactions first. So Jerry, if you want to field your question, and then Kalia and Rev, I'll let you decide who you want to go next, if that's up to y'all.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
Thank you, Ariana. I'm just in awe. I was born and lived through a period when the climate went to hell. So I'm as responsible as anyone else, and I'm just trying to catch up and do stuff for my grandchildren. So, a couple of things. Peggy Robnitz, in the chat or elsewhere, I'd love to know about the mitigation programs, because I'd like to be able to see what we can copy here in Peabody. And following up on what I think Kyle from Alabama said, it is so true that what we do to the least among us bites everybody. We saw a preliminary analysis yesterday of public health data. We were trying to look at pollution from fossil plants, and I love fuelishness. I love that term. But they're building a new fossil fuel plant, and it's in an area that's already overwhelmed with bad stuff. And we thought, well, this is where all the disease is going to be. But we looked at the maps, and looks like half of the city maybe as bad off as the environmental justice areas. So we got a lot of work to do to address the health aspects of burning fossil fuel. And I think we're finding the health impacts, it's closer to where people live. If your kid has got asthma, that's more immediate than the climate going to hell and destroying the world. But we've got to work on both. So I just applaud all the work that people have been mentioning here, and the bluntness with which you bring out the, black is toxic, so you can that'll destroy your home value. I mean, that's just crazy stuff.
If I could just interject and actually build on something Kyle said about energy efficiency. About 15 years ago, I wrote a white paper, and I really felt that we should take energy efficiency funding that was available through municipal governments at the time and make everything airtight, but then retrofit the air conditioning and heating system with high efficiency HEPA filters to protect people from fine particulate, particularly, of fossil fuel combustion and diesel. And I floated around with the Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA because they had a lot of mitigation programs going on at the time, and I just could not get traction. But I still think we can accomplish so much in terms of a lot of the social determinants in disadvantaged communities by attacking the quality of air and energy efficiency together. And I think that would be one idea that, we should really try to pursue nationally, especially in highly polluted areas. Oh, and it also works for climate change induced fire particulate. So it protects you there as well.
Thank you, Doc. Rachel, it looks like you've got your hand up. I want to come to you next.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Malcolm. Reverend Malcolm, I wanted to say so much thank you for answering that very basic question that we've all asked so many times, because when I heard your voice asking, I believe it was Miss Brown, I heard it as the answer, which was, why do we have so many people over here not talking about what's happening in these other communities? Because as you know, we have so many groups that have traditionally identified as environmental, but often they're not the people who are living the other type of environmental action, which is that it's affecting them personally. And when you said it, it was just like all these things I think about in that universe, it just kind of reformed, and I said, that's it, but that's why it's necessary to have these conversations. Sometimes you have to really work at making people aware that, yes, you can see the whole world is on fire, but still somehow, if you haven't been the person who's been impacted by environmental racism, maybe somehow think it's still not going to affect you, maybe. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I typically see maybe 4 categories of people or groups of people when I'm out here doing this work. You'll have those who really care and are out here really doing the work. We love and respect and honor those. Then you'll have those who see it, but they say it's not happening to them, or it's not affecting them in their central area. Then you have those who simply are ignorant to it, and they don't do anything about it, and they don't have anything to do with it, and they just, it's like they're just ignorant to it, and they're willfully ignorant to it. Those people I tend to just let go on about their way. Then there are some who see it, but just don't know what to do. They just don't know what to do. And somebody asked the question, and Kalia spoke on it a minute ago, but somebody asked the question in the chat about how do we reach out to some of our more affluent counterparts who are of a different hue, Black and brown folk who live around. How do we talk to them? And my answer is, you start having relationships with them. You build relationships, get to know them. How do we solve this syndemic that we're in? We solve this syndemic one problem at a time, but we find out those problems by engaging the other. We talk to one another and find out what each other is going through. And here's the kicker. Here's the shouting part. If I was in church, I'd say this part we're gonna shout on right here. If you talk to each other and you really, really talk to the other person and get to know them, a lot of times they got the solutions too, especially when it comes down to our Black and Indigenous and poor communities. Because hell, we had to survive. How do you think we survived if we didn't have solutions? The problem in that we don't have solutions is that we don't have resources. The problem in us not having resources is that there are some who have more resources than others, and they aren't willing to share. We have a problem in this society, and our problem in this society is a lack of caring. If we be honest, we don't give a damn about anything that doesn't happen in our house, period. And that's our issue. And the thing that has to raise is our awareness that other people exist in this world. Other non-humans exist in this world. And the things that happen to those non-humans, the things that happen to those other humans aren't just affecting them, they're affecting all of us. All of us feel the effects of it. So we could ill afford to ignore one another and leave one another out. You've got to form relationships if you want to survive. That's my answer to that question. Sorry, I took the long way around to get there, but I felt compelled to do so. Brother Paul, I want to come to you next.
Rev, I want to testify. I'm the poster boy for white privilege. And what I've come to understand in the age of COVID here, I wanted to understand why it was that our Black communities were suffering from COVID at a higher rate than the white communities. And what I learned was that the inadequate housing, the inadequate access to healthcare, the locations of polluting facilities like trash burners and power plants and highways in Black communities, all contributed to an unequal condition for people of color. And so it was, the scales falling from the eyes of many of us that helped to understand this inequity, see it right here in our neighborhoods. And fortunately, here in Massachusetts, we lobbied to get a new energy siting bill passed by the legislature that creates criteria for environmental justice community impact evaluation before any facility is sited in this state. And it's a tiny, tiny step forward and much to be done, but it's a start. And I'm grateful for this forum because, again, there's always something that I learn and come away from that makes me a more sensitive and responsible citizen. So thank you.
Thank you. Miss Libby, looks like your hand now.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on what you were talking about, Michael Malcolm, and thank you for that. I come from a background of dialogue work, and for more than 30 years, my husband and I brought together Jews and Palestinians in living room dialogue. And what I learned from that experience is that an enemy is one whose story you have not heard. And so if we want to care about our neighbors, and if we want to live with the full reality that we are all interconnected and interrelated and interdependent, we have to see each other as human and equal. And it's really hard to do that if you don't sit down with the other and share your personal story. And if I hear that you are lacking in your grocery store, that's painful to me, but it's different than if I sit down with you and I hear about your life every day and what it takes for you to put a meal on the table. I need to hear your personal story. And I know that in South Africa and Koinonia, Southern Africa, a lot of apartheid was broken down by meal sharing and stories and telling people's personal stories. So I think that's going to be a really important part of how we fix the inequalities and the climate crisis at the same time. But for me, it's all about the relationships. And so I really appreciate bringing all of these very difficult topics to our attention.
Thank you. Sister Margot, it looks like you have your hand up, and then we'll go to Brother Joe.
Thank you, Reverend Michael. I have a little challenge because I'm all about action. So what we're hearing today is really important information and clearly new information for many people on this call. So my challenge is that before this month is over, you spend some time considering the first action step that you're going to take. And it might be a tiny one. It might be just starting to get some understanding of what's happening near you. And when I say near you, I don't just mean your block or your neighborhood, because you might live in a very segregated, privileged community, but your general community, your the broader community. And so I want to just challenge everyone to think about what's one action you can begin with. So, because that first step is the hardest, but once you take it, you're on your way. Thank you so much.
Real quick, Brother Joe, before you go, I want to challenge Sister Margot on her challenge. I want to challenge you to increase your thinking. Dream big. Dream big. I want us to really, we think that we've got to negotiate and we've got to have incremental change and no, why not for the whole haul? Why not try to do it all? Why not shoot for the moon? Why not ask for it all? And one just demand it out. We want a climate emergency and we want it right now. And we ain't gonna stop until we get it. And if you don't want to give it to us, we'll find somebody else that will. We have the power to do so in our vote. Why not do it big? Why not dream big? I think it's our time to dream big. It's our time to really do it big. It ain't over yet. We still got another move because we still got breath in our body. Do it big. I'm not trying to ask for us just to get a little bit. No, give me the whole thing. And don't give me limits because I'm going to throw them back because that ain't what I asked for. Do it big. Okay, I'm sorry, Brother Joe. Let's get it.
Yeah, I was wrote a question about brownfields because people keep talking about air pollution, but the source of air pollution, a lot of it is soil pollution, and it's very historical because back in industries developed, they just took their waste and they just buried it where it was, and then it leaked into the soil and the water, and then as it was done out, it leaked into the air. And there was a super fund that's supposed to deal with that, but it doesn't deal with it hardly everywhere. I mean, I've got an example, Carson is built on contaminated soil. That's why it's cheap. And Santa Ana, there's a north of 17th Street, which is, the richer part that dominates the politics and economics there. And the south of Santa Ana is all on contaminated soil. And, but thousands of people, mainly minorities, Mexican, Asians, and Black people live in Santa Ana primarily. Anyways, I was just wondering, you can go out for some of the landowners who created this. And I was wondering what people were doing, if this was an issue that people were trying to pursue.
Well, I can answer a little of that if you want. Some of the tricks of the trade, if you're a landowner and you have contaminated property, one is to kind of reorganize your assets, transfer the title to that property to an LLC, and then promptly dissolve it and declare bankruptcy. And other things that people do is they sell the property and sneak a liability clause in it that transfers the liability to whoever bought it, so you can't go after them. So there's a lot of sliminess over a lot of decades that went on that really impede EPA from getting the work done. And then what happens? We end up having to use public funding. So we all pay for somebody who made profit off of the land. So it's a really horrible situation that's not easily solved.
Yeah, I want to second what Peggy just said. I was thinking exactly the same thing. Why do we have a super fund? Why is this on taxpayer shoulders? Because all these corporations that should be responsible plays just those kind of games. I've seen this ever since I got involved in the environmental movement. You know, more than 30 years ago, we had a company here in Birmingham, Interstate Lead Company. Oh, they claim to be the good guys. They're lead recyclers, doing horrible things like putting their toxic slag as fill in schoolyards. And then when the heat got turned up, they declared bankruptcy. And so, what's the root cause of all this? Corporations are legally considered persons in this country. Corporations have more rights than trees, than fish, than other animals, including humans in many cases. So we've got a number of root causes to address here. And I'll leave it at that because we start by talking about it and raising these issues.
Thank you, Kyle. I want to recognize Ellen and also that we're running low on time. So I'll let Ellen and then I'll pass it back to Kalia after that.
Okay, this is the first time that I have, well, not the first time I've been to an environmental related meeting, but first time I've been to this group, and I really, appreciate what everybody is saying and doing. I just have to, as I usually do, put in a reminder, and I'm sure I don't have to because you probably already know this, but I'm working on voting rights, and I am very concerned. I think that the two areas still and many others all go hand in hand, because if we lose the democracy that we have, there is not that's already going to destroy the planet. And I think it's so important that we fight against the sabotage that's going on all over the country. I just had to bring it up. I know that this is another forum, but it's so critical. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because you're absolutely right. Go ahead, Russ.
Kalia, I apologize real quick. Becky Blackman asked about what happens to the fines that are collected. And so I want to let Ernico answer what happened to the fine in Gloucester. And I told him, Ernico, that I don't know how it's going to turn out when you answer. Just sit back and relax and enjoy the answer. Go ahead.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So I did answer her back privately, but publicly, that fine went to the state. Those people who do the permitting, it went to the state. It did not go to the community, but the community continues to suffer from the harms and the continued impacts. Even today, it was a $2.5 million fine, and I think like $80,000 a month until they got all of the supposed equipment to alleviate some of the harms and detriments that were going into the community. But as of right now, there has not been a solidified answer to say that they have put all of the necessary equipment into the facility. So the state has the money and the people have the pollution and the harms, basically.
I'm so sorry about that, Ms. Jackie. I did identify you as Miss. I apologize about that. But here's what I really wanted Ernico to get to as well, not just the fact that the state got the money, but the fact that the community didn't even know that the fine existed in the first place until Ernico went and told them that the facility that literally sits on top of them, had been fined $2.5 million for polluting them. Until Ernico went to their community to tell them that, from South Carolina to Mississippi, to tell them that, they did not even know that the fine had taken place in the first place. Let that sit in with y'all. Let that sink in.
So what I'm hearing is Mississippi got a payday off the backs of the people who were being polluted. I didn't even know this story, so I'm sitting here kind of mad.
Not just Mississippi got a payday, but the people that were affected didn't even know that Mississippi got a payday.
Right, exactly.
Off of their suffering.
Ooh, so I think that's just a very sobering way to end this conversation, because the point that proves is that it's not enough to protest and demand we find these industries and we get them back and we make them pay for what they've done, because we know this is a perfect example of it's even deeper than that. It has to be more than just a fine, because who's going to benefit from that? The state, who still does not have the best interests of community. So I just want to thank all of the panelists so much for sharing all of your expertise. And so I want to turn it back over, but first I want to pass it back to Rev if you have any closing thoughts. And I'll just say the only thing on my heart to each of you all on this call is one, appreciation and gratitude for your efforts. And the other thing I just want to encourage is that each of you all continue to get out of your comfort zone, get out of your fear, get out of your shame around how long it took you to learn these things. There is still more than enough time for you all to do the right thing, to change and to help transform all communities across the country and across the world. So sharing a lot of gratitude for the work that you all are doing, and a lot of encouragement and a gentle, loving push to keep doing more, because it's going to take more from all of us if we're going to win.
I have nothing. I know we're short on time. I'll pass it back to Ariana. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I want everybody please virtually give a huge round of applause to all of our panelists and especially our lovely moderators. Thank you so much. Before we go, I know we're running short on time and I don't want to cut off the thank yous, but I do want to make you all aware we will be sending up a follow email with an action that you can take. What we will be doing is around tomorrow, midday-ish to late afternoon, we will be sending an email with a way that you can call the White House comment line. They're open Tuesday to Thursday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. So you can call them tomorrow. We'll have the email to you by the time that you can make the call. And essentially what you're asking them to do and what you can ask them to do with one simple call is to ask Biden to declare a climate emergency, which is something that we desperately need. So you can take action. Yeah.
It sounds like he just did that right before this call started. So
he did.
We'll modify the ask a little bit. We don't need to ask him for the climate emergency, but now let's make sure there's no more funding of fossil fuel infrastructure. So still make your call tomorrow, but it sounds like he just declared a climate emergency. Thank you, Jerry, for letting us know that awesome news, and we can celebrate.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, that's a good way to end this call. A good note after a very sombering conversation. Still so much work that needs to be done. We will have an updated action for you tomorrow. So keep an eye out on your email. That email will also have resources so that you can learn more about environmental justice. It'll have articles you can read, book recommendation, podcast if you're into that. And most importantly, it will have the links to all of our lovely panelists, affiliate organizations, if they have any. Additionally, it will have the organizations of Chispa and Honor the Earth. We were supposed to have 2 people join us, one from Chispa, which is a Latine organizing group, and also from Honor the Earth, which primarily focuses on the Indigenous community. So we will have links so you can learn more about them, because we would love to amplify their work and the needs and ways that you can support those communities, as well as the lovely organizations here. And if you want to support ECA, Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, People's Justice Council, those 2 lovely organizations that have been partnering with us and helping us with this event, you can also do that. Lastly, last reminder, before I offer any space to the speakers, if they want to promote anything, ECA on next Tuesday will be hosting our national call, where we will have someone come in, Rachel Patterson from the Evergreen Action, to talk about Justice 40, which is kind of a nice piggyback to this conversation. Do the speakers want to promote anything, any actions or work that you all are doing before we end our call? Feel free to take yourself off mute if so.
Hi, quick note. Hi, everyone. I'm Marisha Malcolm. Quick note. We do have a meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Time. And it's kind of similar to what we kind of had a conversation about today. So if you guys kind of want to join with us, I'm going to put the link in the chat and you all can register. It's free. It's at 6 p.m. Central Time, again, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So yeah, come on and have a conversation with us.
And that is with People's Justice Council, correct?
Yes, and Alabama IP. Yes.
Yes, everybody, please go support that. Check the link out in the chat. And also, if you send that to me, I will add it to our follow-up email. So hopefully people can get it. If not, they can continue to check out your work if we can get it out in time, hopefully. All right, well, thank you all so much. Thank you all to our panelists, our moderators. Have a lovely evening. Thank you all for joining us. Keep an eye out for that email and don't forget to act.